What's up guys, you're watching Li-Fi TCG. Got a Pauper video for you today, Blue-Black Teachings. I've done a couple of videos for this deck on my channel before, but since the last time I've talked about it, there's some new cards that have come into the format that I think are pretty good for it. So the first of those is Desert, which got added into the format when the online format was unified with paper, because Desert is common in, I believe, Arabian Nights, but it hasn't had any common printing online, so it wasn't legal in Pauper until they merged the rules. So what this card does, it's a land, you can tap it for 1 mana, and you can also tap it to do 1 damage to target a creature that's attacking you, but you can only activate it at the end of combat step, so you have to let the creature deal you the damage. So the reason why I think this is a really good card for the deck is that before, some of the more challenging matchups were those ones sort of built around those kind of like value small creatures. So blue-red Delver and mono-blue Delver to a certain extent. Boros could sometimes be a bit difficult as well. It wasn't too hard for you to beat the like very linear aggro creature decks like Stompy and Affinity and Burn and things like that. They were always quite easy to beat because you could just use removal and then stabilize and then cast Teachings, and then you would usually win. But when you were playing against those like Delver and stuff, it was often hard to like keep up with your removal. Like you would use removal on their creatures, but they would still gain value in the meantime, and you would always just be like a little bit behind. So the reason why Desert is good is that it gives you a way to like clean up small value creatures for no investment, especially things like Fury Miscreant, Fury Seer, Spellstutter Sprite. You only need 1 Desert to kill those, and then even like Battle Screech tokens and stuff like that. Of course Desert is colorless, so Prismatic Strands can't protect it. Yeah, it just seems like a very solid addition for a control deck, and considering how popular Delver or like Spellstutter Sprite decks are in Pauper, I'm really surprised that this card has seen like no play at all since it got brought into the format. And then of course, as the game goes on, you get a second Desert. Now you can kill 2 toughness creatures. You get a third Desert. Now you can kill 3 toughness creatures. You know, eventually you can get all 4, and then you can start to even kill like Mere Enforcer and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a pretty solid upgrade to the deck, I expect. I haven't had much chance to test with this yet. This is all theory, but hopefully it makes sense to you. And then the other card, which I think is like a slightly less significant addition, is the Mystic Sanctuary. So this card has made a pretty big impact on Pauper. It's really nice in the Delver decks because it's really easy to make your first 3 land drops, or your 3 or 4 land drops, all islands. Then when you play this, you get like Deprive back or Tragic Lesson. And in those kind of decks, you never really want to go over your like 4th or 5th land drop anyway. So you can just, once you get to that point in the game, you can just keep casting your Deprive or your Tragic Lesson and keep picking this up. essentially like skipping your land drop for value, and of course because you don't need that any further land drops past that point. It's a really solid way to make sure your opponent like can't come back into the game. In this deck, it's a lot less impressive than that. Firstly, because it's a lot more difficult to just play 3 islands. So the Homeowner Base is 4 Desert, 4 Dimir Aqueduct, 4 Dismal Backwater, 2 Swamp, 7 Island, 1 Terramorphic Expanse, 1 Bojuka Bog, 1 Radiant Fountain, and the Mystic Sanctuary. So, because you only have 7 islands, like you're not going to very reliably be able to use the Mystic Sanctuary trigger, especially not very early in the game. And the other thing is that a lot of the ways that decks abuse Mystic Sanctuary is they bounce it and replay it multiple times, but because this is such like a hard control deck, you want to get to the point where you have like 10 plus lands in play. Like you don't really want to bounce your Mystic Sanctuary just to get like an extra card of value out of it. You'd much rather leave all your lands in play and get value from like your Think Twices and your Mystical Teachings and stuff. So it's definitely not the kind of card that it is in the Delver decks, but you still play it just because in the late game it has a lot of utility. Like you can bounce it with the Dimir Aqueduct to put your spells back on top. You can capsize it as well, like infinite. So you basically have that same kind of like Deprive lock. In the super late game, you can just keep like stacking a counterspell on top of your library every turn. And for example, like because Mystic Sanctuary and combined with the Aqueduct, you can get back Cover-Up. So now you don't have to play 2 Cover-Up, you only have to play 1. And your Cover-Up can reshuffle your Sanctuary back if it somehow gets discarded or something. So yeah, it's just like a little late game just a little option that you can use, but it's not like a huge upgrade compared to the way the Delver decks abuse it. So that's the mana. Onto the spells. So as usual, the main win condition is the Evincar's Justice plus Pristine Talisman. So your Pristine Talisman helps ramp your mana so you can cast your teachings and buy back your Evincar's Justice. And then it also gains you life, so your opponent will die to your Evincar's Justice before you do. This is the main win condition you use in most games. It's very easy to get to a point where like your opponent's out of cards, and even if your opponent doesn't have a ton of creatures that die to Justice, you just eventually burn them out. I think I like having 3 talismans in the build of this deck. Life gain is really important with the desert, because in order for you to use it as removal, you have to let the creatures hit you. So if you don't have a source of life gain, you can find yourself getting too low on life, taking damage from your opponent's creatures, so you can shoot them with desert. Then the card advantage. So I'm playing 4 Mystical Teachings. I'll put Capsize in this as well, but even though it's not really. 4 Think Twice, and 1 Whispers of the Muse. So as I mentioned Tragic Lesson before on why it doesn't really make sense in this deck. Like when you only have 1 copy of the Mystic Sanctuary and no way to tutor for it, like it's pretty hard to get that combo online. And you don't want to pick up your own lands until like the very, very late game anyway. So like in the early game, when you're trying to draw spells and stabilize, paying 3 mana to draw 2, discard 1 is really bad. It's basically like Catalog, right, which is an unplayable card. So in that slot, I'm basically playing the Whispers of the Muse instead. So you can think that like Tragic Lesson is like 3 mana, buyback, skip your land drop, draw a card, and Whispers of the Muse is just 6 mana, buyback, draw a card. So it costs 3 more mana, but you don't have to skip your land drop, which is much more in line with what the plan of this deck is trying to do. But even then, I played this card before in this like similar deck, and I thought this was overkill. Like in the late game, you don't really need it. What I have played before in the slot is Lat-Nam's Legacy, which is you shuffle a card from your hand into your library, and then at the beginning of your next upkeep you draw 2 cards. That's maybe what I would also consider playing over that. Then the counters, we have 4 Counterspell, 3 Exclude, 1 Cover-Up, 1 Prohibit, and 1 Deprive. Exclude is really good, but I'm only including 3 because in some matchups it's a bit too clunky and slow. Normally in the matchups where you really want this effect, like it's okay to not have all 4 in game 1 and you can board up in the 4th one. 4 Counterspell just because it's one of the best interaction, and then 1 Prohibit just to like Mize a 5th Counterspell. It might be correct to like play 2 Prohibit and 3 Counterspell, for example, or just more copies of Prohibit, because the mana base is a bit worse now, because you have to play 4 colorless lands to incorporate the deserts. I am playing like 25 lands, which is on the high side, but I think probably the number of blue sources has overall gone down a little bit. Because I did used to play, so I used to play 2 Dimir Guildgate instead of the Terramorphic. I'm playing Terramorphic now just because it's a little bit better with the Mystic Sanctuary. So I had 2 of that before, and I had 2 Radiant Fountain before, and I also I think I had 3 Swamps rather than just 2. So maybe the number of blue sources hasn't actually gone down by too much. But yeah, with 4 colorless lands, it could be correct to maybe play more Prohibit instead of some counterspells. And then I do have 1 Deprive just because, like, for the late game loop with the Mystic Sanctuary, it seems really strong. But like anytime you have to play this on like turn 2 to 7, you're going to be pretty disappointed about having to skip your mana development. So I could definitely see it being incorrect to play this. And then we have the 1 copy of Cover-Up. Only 1 now, because if you want you can loop it with Mystic Sanctuary, and you can keep replaying the Mystic Sanctuary with either like tap lands or Capsize. So you don't need to play 2 Cover-Up anymore to get the loop where you like keep shuffling them both back. But I still like having the 1 copy just because having the counterspell, the exiles, can be a big deal in some situations, and you can also shuffle. It's also a triggerable way that you can like shuffle back specific instants and things like that when you need it. So yeah, I think this is pretty fine. Maybe cut the Deprive for another Prohibit, or like a Essence Scatter or a Negate or something. Then the removal. This is the last. So I have 2 Disfigure and 1 Tragic Slip for 1 mana, and then 2 Echoing Decay. So I do think you want like 3 slots of this kind of like early 1 mana removal. You could play a 3rd Disfigure instead of the Tragic Slip, maybe, but I think the extra utility is probably worth it. The nice thing about these removal spells is they synergize really well with the Desert because they scale based on the toughness. So like if your opponent's attacking you with a core Skyfisher, you can Disfigure it, then you take no damage, and then you can shoot it with 1 Desert to kill it. And you know, likewise, if you have 2 Deserts and a Disfigure, you can kill a 4/4 and things like that. So they don't become like totally useless in the late game. You can effectively kill like much bigger creatures with these. 1 Echoing Decay is pretty essential for the main deck. I think the second one is optional, but it seems good enough. And then I have 2 Edicts. That always feels correct when you're playing Teachings, to always have at least 2 instant speed Edicts. And then I have 1 Rend Flesh. You gotta have 1 kind of like murder effect. I think I was playing like literal murder before, but as I said before, the mana's a little bit worse now. So like spirits aren't really that important in Pauper, so the downside is not really that noticeable, and being easier to cast matters a lot. So 1 Rend Flesh. Then we have 1 Ob Nixilis Cruelty. So in most situations this is just like Rend Flesh because there aren't too many huge creatures in Pauper. Like Ulamog's Crusher is maybe one of the only ones. And then being able to exile the target is pretty important, both against like value stuff that comes back when it dies. So I'm thinking of like Young Wolf or Stormbound Geist, but also versus decks that are trying to loop their creatures. So if you can Ob Nixilis Cruelty like in a Monocall or something, that can be pretty good usually as well. And the last card is sort of like my pet card that I think it's pretty good, but not many other people will probably think of it or be that keen on it. It's 1 Splendid Agony, so 3 mana instant, divide 2 -1 counters among 1 or 2 creatures. So it's just like a really flexible spell. You can kill 2 1/1s or 1 2/2, and as I said before, like the way that this kind of like piecemeal toughness shrinking goes really well with the Desert, because you can, like, if your opponent has 2 2/2s and they're attacking you with both, you can like -1 both and then Desert both to kill them or whatever, you know. So yeah, that's the full list of the deck. So my feel on the deck is that the mana base is like pretty close to correct. 4 Desert, Sanctuary, 1 more dual land, I think, Bog, 1 Fountain I think is fine, 4 Aqueduct, 4 Backwater, and then 7 islands and 2 swamps, so for 25 lands. You could maybe add an extra land, but I think that's probably unnecessary, especially because you have the talismans as mana sources as well. So I can't imagine the best mana base is too far away from that. Then 4 Think Twice I think is correct. I thought about playing AK, Accumulated Knowledge, rather than Think Twice, because it's slightly better with Mystic Sanctuary, being able to like when you have 3 or 4 AKs in the graveyard, stacking it back to do it again with Sanctuary is obviously quite strong, but using Sanctuary in general is just so unreliable, and Think Twice is a little bit better than AK just in general for this deck, so I'd rather play the Think Twice. 4 Think Twice, 4 Teachings I would always play, Capsize I would always play. 3 Talisman I think is fine, but if you want you could maybe cut 1. I would definitely play 2 Justice main, regardless of whether you had 2 or 3 Talismans. 1 Rend Flesh, like you have to have 1 kind of effect like this, whether you want to play Rend Flesh or Murder or Doomblade in that slot. 2 Edict minimum I think, 1 Echoing Decay main deck minimum. Then I think you want 3 slots on the 1 mana removal, whether you want to play this split or you want to have 3 Disfigures, or maybe one of these could be like a Ghastly Demise or something, but I don't really like that card that much. Then in terms of the counters, 1 Cover-Up I would always play, I think. 3 Exclude feels alright, but you could maybe play only 2. I wouldn't play all 4 main deck, I think that's probably too slow. Then 4 Counterspells, I'd like to play 4 Counterspells, I think the mana can tolerate it, but if not, then, well, you know, figure it out. So the flexible cards I sort of feel are like less essential. The Whispers of the Muse, I like having like 1 extra cantrip slash card advantage slash consistency thing, but I feel like the Lat-Nam Legacy might be a little bit better. Then just a mix of like whatever removal and counter spells you like. So the Deprive or the Prohibit, either of these could become like Essence Scatter or Negate. Recoil maybe is the card you could play as like extra disruption. I'm not exactly sure. The Cruelty and the Splendid Agony and the second Echoing Decay I like fine. But if you have like one effect that you like desperately think, oh, why aren't you playing a copy of this card, then I would switch out any of these for it. Like maybe you really want to play like an Agony Warp or something, you could play that instead of the Echoing Decay. Yeah, so that's how I would tweak the deck if you wanted to like switch a few slots up. Then the sideboard. Oh yeah, one thing you might be wondering is why I'm not playing Augur anymore. The reason mainly is that it's not very synergistic with Desert, because, well, in a way it kind of is, because like if your opponent has a 2/2 creature and you have Desert, they can't attack it into your Augur because your Desert will kill it. But the way Desert works is that like it really doesn't want you to tap out. You want to leave the mana open on your opponent's turn, and then if they don't attack because they were scared of Desert, then end of their turn you can use the mana to do something. So it's harder to play that gameplay pattern if you have sorcery speed creatures in your main deck. That's the main reason, and that's why I'm not playing Chainer's Edict as well, which is another card that you could have put in the main deck if you wanted. But yeah, the Augur's just like a little bit too just synergistic with the Desert plan. Yeah, the sideboard I'm not totally sure. So I like playing the third Justice in the 75, as well as Cower and Fear, just to like shore up the creature matchups. Then the fourth Exclude, like I talked about. Crypt Incursion I think is really essential. Really high impact in certain matchups. I definitely wouldn't leave home without one copy of that. New card from Modern Horizons, Stream of Thought. So 1 mana, target player mills 4, you shuffle 4 cards back, and it has Replicate 4. So this is kind of like a bomby win con for control mirrors. It's really hard to counter it because it has Replicate. Like if you pay 12, 13 mana into it, for example, which is like not unrealistic in a very late game situation, which will happen in the control mirrors, like you get 4 separate instances of this, and your opponent has to counter all of them individually if they want to stop it. And then if they don't stop any of them, because the shuffle back option doesn't target, unlike on Cover-Up, which I believe does target. Let me check. Yeah, so Cover-Up, you have to target the cards in your graveyard, but this one doesn't. So like as long as even one of those copies resolves, then you can like for example shuffle back the Cover-Up, and then you like keep the loop going, and meanwhile your opponent milled a bunch of cards so they're closer to decking. It just seems like a really strong card. Like those kind of matchups aren't very popular in Pauper, so it's not super important. But the other nice thing about this is that you can sort of think of it as like a blue fireball in those matchups where you want to board out Justice because the sweep does nothing, or you don't want the life loss. So like for example versus Burn, like it's definitely correct to board out all of your Justice and just like wait for them to deck out. And of course like they will always deck out before you because they have no way to interact with your Mystic Sanctuary Cover-Up stuff, but that can take a really long time, like online and in paper. That can be really annoying. So just to be able to get to a point where you're on like 30 life because you have the talismans going and your opponent has like 10 or 20 cards or whatever left in the library, and you can just like tap out and mill them for a bunch, that's I mean, it's kind of like training wheels, but it's not the worst thing to have access to. And like I say, if you somehow end up in like the blue-black teachings mirror or something, this is probably one of the like strongest bombs you could play. And then 2 Hydroblast I think is fine, just to like destroy Curse of the Fierce Heart and shore up the burn matchup a little bit. Fine against like Affinity as well. And then Dispel for like the Tron and the Control Mirror. Shrivel is like another good removal option. I like to play just 1 Cower in Fear because it's tutorable, but 3 mana is kind of a lot. So in those matchups you normally only want like 1 copy of Cower in Fear, and then the rest Shrivel if you want more. 1 Annul is okay, I think. Just it's fine versus like Affinity and Boggles. But it's not super exciting either. And then I mean the rest of these cards are just like random leftovers. I have like a Chainer's Edict and another Ob Nixilis Cruelty and 2 Augurs, but I wouldn't sideboard those. Yeah, these are just like more random cards that I haven't really thought. So the Annul feels kind of optional, and the Shrivel might not be so necessary anymore because the Desert now in the deck is going to help those matchups a lot already anyway. So I'd probably play all of these cards in my sideboard, but then these ones are a bit more optional, so that's why I would look to adjust. So yeah, that's my new update for you guys. Dimir Deserts. Yeah, I was just lucky to find these in a box in the Haruria shop in Nagoya when I was there for the GP last month. But yeah, unfortunately I haven't really been able to play this much in paper yet because my local Pauper scene has kind of died off. If you're in Singapore somehow and you're watching this, let me know and we can play some games. But otherwise you're going to have to take it to Magic Online and let me know how it goes. So that's all for today. This is Life ITCG signing out.